Hello, my name is Clay Grossman, and welcome back to another episode of From the Brink, the Hitching Post podcast. I'm joined today by my wonderful co-host Paul Dehlinger.
Hello.
And Colby Reynolds.
Howdy.
And today we're going to be talking about something that I think is going to be very important and increasingly important as we're going on in this political scene, the 2024 presidential race, and specifically the GOP and what candidate they are going to run. The three of us have picked out some candidates we like. We're going to discuss the merits of them on the basis of who we like ideologically, and we're going to discuss them on the merits of who we think is going to win. But I'd be remiss if I asked, how are you doing this morning, gentlemen?
Tired.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, it's April. I am joined by two engineers. I think it's getting to that point of the year.
Yeah.
We are recording this on a crisp Sunday morning. I think if I didn't have this coffee in my hand, I would be just about still in bed, right? But how are y'all feeling going into 2024? I guess it'd be a good start. And what are you looking for in candidates, right? Paul, obviously we've discussed this many times. We all take the conservative issue from a different perspective. So, Paul, if you had to say like what criteria you're looking for with a candidate in 2024, what do you think it is by chance?
So I look at, a couple different things. I do put a heavy emphasis on electability, maybe more so than other conservatives do, because I'm like, if they're not legitimately going to get elected, what's the point? Now that's kind of a vague term. Like a lot of people would have thought Trump was unelectable, but clearly that was proven incorrect. I do care really mainly about the issues. Like I do want somebody who's going to take on the national debt, which is really our biggest problem. Like somebody who's going to at least attempt to make the cuts necessary to make sure our generation isn't burdened by, even more debt than we already have. And I do look at a more hawkish foreign policy. I want somebody who's going to be pretty aggressive with China. I do kind of agree with the assumption that we are in a new Cold War with China, and I think that's something our politicians need to acknowledge and to make the difficult choices on.
Yeah. And Colby, how do you feel about candidates going into 2024?
I mean, honestly, I think it's going to be a lot of promising to reverse what Biden did, pulling like a 2016. Biden or Harris. I mean, Biden's going to kick the can anytime today. But back in 2016, you saw a lot of the candidates. I know Ted Cruz definitely he went up there during one debate and said on day one, I'm going to write out every illegal thing Obama did. I think there's going to be that. Definitely. I mean, China was an issue in 2016. It's probably more so going to be one that this time, especially with the recent news of China being way more aggressive towards Taiwan recently. What else would there be? I really want there to be a lot of fiscal conservative talk. I'm not sure how realistic that is these days. I would like, I don't know how realistic this is either, but I would really like, I'm not like completely opposite of Paul, but I'm kind of opposite of Paul. I'm more of a isolationist ain't the right term, but I'd say a very strong military presence, but we're not really too involved anywhere that we don't need to be. Like, I agree that we should be in Japan and South Korea due to China's presence, but like, I'm not sure if we really need that air base in Kazakhstan or to keep like carrying the burden of Europe's military on our backs. I would like another Trump-esque combat.
And how do y'all we did the thing where we listed off three of our candidates to have like a chance in 2024 that we'd like on the criteria that we'd like them to run, right, versus their electability and stuff like that. I have my three, but I'll start with you, Paul. Who are your three that you picked out above all else? And keep in mind, you can't vote for your candidate that you voted for in 2020. For those of you who don't know, our token neocon over here wrote in his own name in the 2020 ballot race, which is, I would say, a tier below who I voted for in 2020. But that being said, Paul.
I mean, you voted for Joe Jorgensen, so if I had to choose, I'd still say my candidate was better. I mean, he wasn't eligible, but he was definitely the best man for the job.
Oh, I think we all know that at a certain level. But Paul, if you had to pick your top three candidates going into 2020, which ones do you think they would be and why?
So I think, like everybody knows, I am a Rubio guy, so he'd probably be my first pick. How he'll do in a primary, that's, I guess, yet to be seen. I don't think he's as much of a wounded animal as Ted Cruz is. So, and he recently got Trump's endorsement for his Florida re-election or Senate bid. So there's that. Next is actually somebody who was in the Trump administration, Nikki Haley. I like, what she's done. It's kind of funny. I'm going to do an article on John Bolton's book, The Room Where It Happened, but it's very clear that she joined the Trump administration just so she could kind of check off foreign policy experience. But she does have that. She's got executive experience as a governor of South Carolina, so that's good. And I think she can kind of motivate a lot of the Trump base. Maybe not the most. Coley said he didn't like the word isolationist. I think the word he was kind of looking for is non-interventionist.
Yes.
Okay. So for the people in the Trump movement who are very opposed to that, maybe turned off by Nikki Haley. But at the same time, I mean, the dynamic in the Middle East has changed a lot from George W. Bush's term to even, like, I guess, early first term Barack Obama. And then third is DeSantis, the Florida governor. I think, he's handled the pandemic fairly well. The fact that the left hates him so much is only going to kind of help his reputation among people on the right. And I mean, if we're looking at governors, I just think, the one that a lot of people talk, no, I forgot her first name, but is it
Kristi Noem?
Kristi Noem, yeah. Just, being the governor of, is it South Dakota?
Yeah,
South Dakota.
I just don't think that's enough of a resume to, like, justify, like, your presidential bid, which I think I know a lot of people want her to do. And, like your other governors like Abbott, a lot of people in Texas are really happy about how he handled it compared to DeSantis. So that's why I'd got to put my money on DeSantis.
Colby?
Mine would be Ted Cruz is the first one. I like Ted Cruz still. And then probably Mike Pence. I like Mike Pence's work in the White House, and his evangelical nature appeals to me specifically. And last one would be, like Paul said, DeSantis. I liked his response. Now, he's the least I know about, in complete honesty. But if he has the guts to pull what he did with COVID, I'd really like to see that in the White House.
Yeah. So I break candidates down into essentially three categories, right? First would obviously be how much I agree with them in terms of ideology, right? The second one would be their electability in a national sense, right? So that would be not non-primary, right? And their electability within a primary, right? I think ideology is probably the most important, right? Followed like closely second in terms of electability, right? We want to be running candidates that we know can win, but we don't want to be running Rockefeller Republicans, essentially, right? And then primary, I put the least amount of importance into that one, but it is still important to talk about when we're discussing candidates, right? My number one is still Rand Paul, as much as he has become I don't want to say an outlier within his own party, but he's increasingly been shifting that way. I gave him a 9 in terms of ideology. He's got an 89% lifetime rating with the Heritage Foundation, but I think he falters in electability in a grand scheme of things, right? I do not see him beating Kamala Harris in the 2024 presidential race. I think he's probably. I just don't see he doesn't have a national appeal, right? He doesn't. He struggles with areas of getting the populist base out, which is where the GOP, as we've all acknowledged, has sort of shifted in the past few years. And I don't really give him much of a chance of winning a primary, even though he's won the CPAC poll 3 times. Fun fact, 2013, 14, and 15.
Yeah, and won 0 primaries.
And won 0 primaries, right? Just to show you where the GOP base is really at. And I honestly think probably in terms of the best electable candidate, right, is Ron DeSantis at this point. I think that Colby hit on a good point, right? Aside from really his masking things, he doesn't really have he really wasn't, with local candidates, right? You struggle to see how they're going to govern in a national sense, right? He was very popular, though, in Florida. I believe pre-COVID, he was one of the highest rated governors in terms of approval rating, right? He holds down a swing state, right? I think he definitely has a broad enough appeal where he can kind of feign interest in the sort of limited government right, and He can also dabble into the Trumpism era because he was very anti-mask, right? Obviously, or I don't want to say very anti-mask, but he handled COVID very
anti-government.
government,
not impairment, but
government intervention, right?
Yeah, intervention. Yeah.
And I also give him a 9 to win the primary, right? Outside of Donald Trump, of course, he was the second highest rated candidate in the CPAC poll, right? And this is with him, only coming onto the political landscape really in 2018, right?
Well, didn't he come in didn't he kick out the Rhino governor, if I remember correctly?
No.
I forget who
the senator of Florida now?
Yeah.
Rick Scott.
Yeah. So he took
Rick
up.
Scott?
Yeah.
Rick Scott.
So originally he ran in 2016 actually to take over Marco Rubio's seat when he was running for presidency, right? But when Rubio jumped back into that race, he obviously dropped out. And then he ran again in 2018, right? Rick Scott was retiring because of term limits, right? And he went against I'm blanking on his name, Andrew Gillum.
Gillum, yeah.
Very tight race. Well, I would say a lot of money got thrown into that Florida governor's race. He still stuck out and won that race very hard and true. So I think we're looking at a candidate who can sort of make gains where hold on to what the states that Trump really made gains in. I'm talking like Florida, right? Ohio, right? And then someone who can win back Georgia voters, who can win back some voters and the Rust Belt. I see Ron DeSantis as the most electable candidate. Outside of that, my list gets a little bit weaker. I would like to see Ted Cruz make another attempt at it, but at this point, I think he'd be best just to be. I don't really know what his political future is. I think Paul said it best. He's a wounded duck. We've acknowledged this plenty of times. He tried to kind of play the middleman between the Trumpism era and his own conservative background, right? Now, I got to ask you all this, right? 2016 was the year of the outlier candidates, right? Bernie made a sizable chunk into Hillary's lead, even though that was a shoo-in, right? And Trump obviously shocked everybody by winning the GOP nomination. So my question to y'all, of the candidates who have publicly expressed interest, right, of the candidates who have not, but that people have wanted to run, do you guys see there being a Trump-esque figure who kind of represents an outside wing of the party? I'll start with you on that one.
No, because I think we're going to see the backlash to that. I mean, the Democrats are a more effective political machine, so they were able to both times beat that down. Because I think there's some broad support for a less radical candidate in the Democratic, primary voters. Now, that gets shifted to the left when, Bernie Sanders is the outlier. So the other candidates, can pretend to be moderates even when they go to the left. But still, I think Republican voters, at least a large swath of them, would like to kind of return to normalcy. Like, okay, let's maybe not go with the outlier, because people say I don't want to standard politicians, but what they kind of forget is getting stuff done through, even when you do have a majority in both houses, is still kind of hard. You do have to make some deals, and you do need to compromise, and somebody has been in politics is going to be a little more effective than somebody that's never been in the Senate, or who's always been like an outlier. And that's why I think Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, even though they're both fairly popular senators in the conservative movement, they've always really been more people that just stop bad things from happening, opposed from actually getting positive legislation pushed through. And so that's why I think, both of them, there's a large portion of people in the party that don't want either of those two to be candidates.
So you're saying that the Mike Lindell 2024 train is not happening?
Yeah, and also, I think I mentioned it earlier. I think he's a felon, so he can't actually legally run for president.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, some candidates I'm looking at a list right now of candidates who have been speculated to run, and the one that honestly surprised me the most was Mike Lindell, aka the CEO of MyPillow, aka if you ever watch Fox News, you will see him on every third ad, right? But I can see there's a few other activists that I know have expressed interest, right? Candace Owens probably be the biggest name. Do you ever no chance?
Candace Owens for president?
She ran. She put a statement out a few weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, right? It was pretty short when it was I'm considering running for 2024 or something like that.
Is she 35?
She's 31 now.
She's
so.
30. Oh.
Well, let's see what she would be.
Yeah, she'd be old enough.
She'd be 34. Yeah, so yeah, she'd be just above the cup there. Another one that's been I would say rumored, Dan Bongino, right? And then as far as like political active outsiders, I really don't see any true ones that have really thrown their hat into the ring, right? Obviously, I think if Donald Trump Jr. is not going to the Senate and Donald Trump Sr. doesn't want to run again, I could see Jr. making a run into the presidency. But do you see any outside candidates having a real shot in the GOP in the 2024 race? Any of the activists, any of the random politicians and commentators that have been brought up? Or do you think 2016 having an outside candidate like Trump win is not the norm now?
I think, for what I've seen, I think people are sick of regular politicians. It's kind of opposite of Paul's view. I could see Trump running again. I don't know about winning, but I could see him running again. I personally like the appeal of less ties to bureaucracy and other institutions in Washington in a presidential candidate, but I don't know how realistic that is these days.
Yeah.
To assume that somebody without those ties will win. I hope that that's possible again, but
right.
I don't know.
So I think 2024 is going to be a weird race because even though Trump still technically represents a majority of the party, I still see him being an outside candidate, so to speak. I think the GOP establishment is going to try to move.
Well, that's from relatively viewing the rest of the party, right?
What's up?
That's from relatively viewing the rest of the party, right?
Even with the CPAC poll, he got like 55%, but even then there was a sizable chunk, a majority that said they didn't want him to run again, and I think that's really enigmatic. Think about who goes to CPAC, though, right? It's the hardcore Trump supporters. It's hardcore conservative supporters, right? So Trump, had a 97% approval rating from the GOP, but amongst Republicans.
Yeah.
Right? So to see that, I still think Trump is an outside candidate, but he could also, in a sense, be the Joe Biden of this race. Think about it like this, right? There were 22 declared candidates for the DNC, right? Last time, if I'm not mistaken, there was a lot.
There was a lot.
And they all kind of had the same message, right? But there was none that could form a coalition against having Joe Biden be the nominee, right? Joe Biden still kind of had that 30 to 40% range.
Well,
I
disagree. That what happened was Joe Biden was chosen to form the coalition against Bernie because it seemed like there was a Bernie train that was going to go through it, and then that stopped in South Carolina, and then Joe Minton.
Yeah, I thought Bloomberg was they were pushing up Bloomberg to try because they figured, oh crap, Biden's losing his mind. We need to push Bloomberg up there, and I thought Bloomberg was the one.
No, I think in a sense there was a general message outside of really Bernie and Biden, right? That there was the DNC needed to get younger, right? You saw this especially from candidates like Kamala, like Pete Buttigieg, right? That was the MO, right? But because Biden held on to it was around 30 to 40% generally throughout the primary, right? Especially in the early days, no candidate could get Joe Minton going. So it was Bernie over here, right? And Biden essentially at the end of the choice. And in the end, yes, all the candidates coalesced against Bernie because he was the latter of two options. But in the early primary, right, where I'm talking like August to 2012, right, August to December, right, that region of 2019, right, where candidates are ideal at building their grassroots efforts up, right, they're ideally getting a donor base, right. There was no young candidate especially, who could form a coalition that would have been against Biden. And that's what I'm worried about happening in 2024, right? If Trump runs, right, he probably will only get about, realistically, maybe 45% of the primary, right? Still enough to carry him through the 2024 race is what I'm trying to get at. Do you agree? Would you agree with that, Paul?
I agree it's a possibility. I mean, that's essentially what happened the first time. And people forget he didn't actually win a majority of the electorate in the primary. I do want to kind of, not to relitigate history, but I mean, you're talking about a whole bunch of polls in the Democratic primaries before they actually had elections. Like, I think at one point Kamala Harris was third, didn't win a single state. So, I mean, just to your point, like, Joe Biden was losing a lot of support because people were like, like Colby said, like they're like trying to prop up Bloomberg. And if you throw $500 million at anything, like, you can probably help. But look, I mean, like, people don't realize the amount of support Joe Biden had, fairly or unfairly, amongst like African Americans in the South. And South Carolina is what put him over the edge and was like, oh, he could still win. And they're like, okay. And then so right. all the moderate support, and even some of the, slightly left-leaning kind of consolidated around him, and, you had some candidates drop out. As far as this happening, I don't know. I think there are a lot of Republican voters would be more willing to, like, forgo their preferred candidate to consolidate, opposed to how they were last time, where you had still about 4 candidates in the primary running against Trump. I mean, you had Rubio, Cruz, Ben Carson, and then who's the governor of Ohio? Kasich. Yeah. And nobody wanted to drop out. Like, this time I've kind of made the joke, like, I don't care what, Rubio, Haley, Cruz, Tim Scott have to do. If they have to, like, go in the back and play Russian roulette to decide who gets to be the candidate against Trump, they got to do something. So
you think if it's a one-on-one scenario, right? And this will go to you. If the last 2 candidates are Trump and let's just say are Trump and Ron DeSantis, right? Do you think that that Ron DeSantis would win in that scenario? Do you think Trump would win in that scenario? What is all his thoughts on that, right?
That's a hard one because I know Trump polarizes a lot of the vote, but he also got the most votes out of any incumbent ever, and that can't be from just population growth. I don't think the upshift was, I think, a lot higher in terms of natural growth than the 2016 presidential election. Now I know Biden got the most out of any candidate ever, and I personally question the legitimacy of that. That's just my view, but that's a hard one. And with COVID being such a huge issue, especially it's more of a state issue, but the feds are trying to make it their issue, and it kind of already is. So that's a hard one. I don't know, because if you vote for DeSantis just off his COVID response, then that would gain a huge percent of the vote, I think. But then Trump's appeal in general, at least to what we've seen, is also up there.
Yeah, I would vote for DeSantis. I did vote for Trump, as y'all know, in 2020, but I would vote for DeSantis on the grounds that in a primary, that is, because he is the most electable candidate. I would say. I would argue he's young, right? He represents sort of a coalition, so to speak, of the old and new guard in the GOP, and I think he represents where the party kind of wants to go. But that being said, I think there's a possibility of Trump throwing his hat into the ring. I think we're understating the possibility of an outside candidate, right? Trump 2015, right? Kind of throwing his hat in the ring, right?
Well, I kind of want to bounce off that for both of y'all. I mean, do y'all not think that Trump's support is diminished in the Republican Party just because of how the transition ended? My thing with this, like, they can't understand, like, how Joe Biden got all these votes. Like, well, I mean, if you're a Trump supporter, I'm sure you can understand that. But if you think, like, Trump is toxic, then, yeah, I can very easily see why a lot of people on the left, like, voted against him. I mean, we forget there are more Democrats than there are Republicans in the country. And, Biden kind of overwhelmingly won moderates, unlike, 2016, where most moderates went to him opposed to Clinton. So I'm not like, I don't really see the upside of having Trump on the ticket, opposed to somebody who could maybe, gain some of that support, but not be as polarizing. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems is you have to get a candidate that's not going to drive out the other side so much, which, I mean, Trump definitely does that in a way. I don't think DeSantis would do it as bad. Now, there'd be a lot of the people who are like, oh, you killed people by not having a mask mandate. But I think the moderate side, like the people who are, do not define themselves as Democrat or Republican, I think they'd be more willing to go DeSantis than to go Trump. But even in a general, to go DeSantis versus, I don't think Kamala Harris is a very electable candidate. Like, people in her own party don't like her. So as far as, like, the general electorate, I see that as a pretty easy win for DeSantis.
Yeah. So as far as DeSantis goes, I think it's really a concern on how he plays his cards in the next 2 to 3 years, right? How much he ties himself directly to the Trump era, right? And it also depends on how big of an issue COVID response still is. Personally, I think it will have died down in importance, still be something that's a talking point, right? I think if in a hypothetical, even a GOP primary, but especially a national election, it could be brought up, right? As far as Trump goes, and your question about is his support in the party kind of waxing or waning, I would definitely say it's waning in a sense, right? I mean, the CPAC poll, right? It goes back to this Karl Rove quote I have, right? This was about the CPAC poll, right? 2021, right? And the reason I keep bringing up CPAC, I should clarify, right? It is very important for fundraising. It's good point, very important to see where the party is at, so to speak, right? It's very preliminary, right? But suffice to say, this Karl Rove quote. This is Trump's truest relievers, right? And for him to only get 55% of the poll, right, says he's losing strength within his own party because he's not introducing them to something new. He's losing strength whether he recognizes it or not. I think Trump is slowly waning in support. Now, the only caveat I can see to that, the only counter I can see to Karl Rove's quote on that one would be the fact that this was, about a little over a month removed from the Capitol Hill incident. So time will really tell, but generally, as it stands right now, April 2021, I would say that Trump's support within the party has gone down. Colby, how do you feel about that by chance?
I could see that, yeah. Yeah, Trump himself, I guess I could see that. I don't know much about it. I haven't been keeping up with that specifically, to be completely honest. But I can see some of his support retaining, given the stuff the Biden administration's pulled. Now, if there's a correlation between that, I don't know exactly, but that's just a guess.
Well, I mean, every Republican is always going to run against the stuff Biden did during his presidency when they run for president. That's just kind of how the system works. But I mean, some things we have to be considering, like the economy may be fairly well in 2024. Now, I mean, we could also have huge inflation. It could be like the 70s all over again. Like we really don't know. But let's go over the assumption that the economy is pretty good. There's probably back to 2% growth. Republicans are going to have to run on something other than like tax cuts and some of the culture stuff. Like I agree that culture stuff's important, but we actually might have to campaign on making tough decisions, kind of controlling spending, and we actually have to mean it this time. That's just my thoughts on it.
Well, I guess shifting gears here a little bit, how do y'all feel about the DNC primary? Right now, I should clarify, we will speak from a more outside perspective, and we're all clearly invested in how the GOP runs in 2024, right? But less so in the DNC. But that being said, do y'all think it's a Kamala show, right? Do you think she has a lesser to the lockdown? I personally don't think that. But who do y'all see coming out of the Democratic primary in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, unlike Colby, I don't think Joe Biden will die. I mean, during his presidency, God forbid. But I don't think it's going to be a lock-in for Kamala Harris. Like the establishment may form around her, but they're being in a weaker position because they could latch on to Joe Biden because the actual numbers were there for Kamala Harris. Like I don't see it. Like I could definitely see Michelle Obama jumping into the ring, though she may try for a Senate seat first to get some actual experience in governing. But yeah, I don't know about y'all. AOC, I can see her running again. I know Clay thinks she'll run for the Senate first, which would be smart. But I mean, when you're 31 and you have all these people around the country telling you how amazing you are, you start to listen to your own hype. And I think she's basically thinks she's in charge of the party right now.
So if we were having this conversation in pretty much any other era pre 2016, I would have said, yeah, AOC, she ran for president. That'd be very dumb, right? She should play this political house of cards right. She should go after Schumer's seat, right? Or get an upper level job, or get a job in a presidential administration, right? Diversify herself, grow her resume outside of her base. But we're not in that era anymore. We're in a social media driven era. We're in an activist driven era where it's much more about how your rhetoric is, right? And you can have a much broader appeal based on that. So I could see her throwing her hat in the ring. I still don't think it's the smart decision, right? I honestly think that there's a few candidates that really jump out to mind in this one. Now, I really do think it's, at this point, the favoritism, Kamala and Michelle, right? Michelle, for that latter reason, she might not even need to go for a Senate seat first. She might just be, hey, I'm the first lady. You guys liked me when I was here. And, she just says Obama 3 times and wins the primary, right? I would favor her in a primary versus Michelle Obama. a few other candidates I could see. One of the ones I could really see would be Stacey Abrams, right? I know you scoff at that, Paul, but I'm keep in mind her highest held office is in the Georgia House of Representatives. It's not the U.S. House of Representatives, Georgia specifically, right? But we talk about running a campaign, right? We talk about very grassroots efforts, right? She built that coalition in 2018 locally, right? She built it off of door knockers, right? And that's why she challenged Brian Kemp so hard in 2018, right? That in the national trends, but if she could do something similar, she could replicate that sort of coalition, right, of grassroots efforts. I could definitely see Abrams throwing her hat into the ring, but really and truly, those are my only three candidates that I could see right now. It's a little bit hard to gauge because we're only what three months into a new liberal administration, right? But Colby, how do you feel about any of the candidates in 2024 for the DNC specifically?
I'd probably say Harris. Like, we're talking about 3 months in Harris right now, but I could see her putting on like a mask of sorts and starting to be, hey guys, look at me, Democratic Party, I'm cool, and then gain the support of it. Plus, I mean, I consider the media to be a huge driving force in these elections, and once the media is obviously mostly left, so whoever decides to spin the media towards a specific left candidate is probably going to, I say, has a higher chance of winning the primary. So I'd say Harris, just from the fact of the Harris or AOC for the fact of first female president, all that stuff. Her policy will probably be an appeal to left, since we agreed a couple of weeks ago that the left's more radicalizing, if I remember correctly.
So I think it's radicalizing. I think the progressive wing is growing. I still don't think it consummates a majority, and maybe not even a plurality of the party right now. AOC's approval ratings nationally are abysmal, right? If the DNC was smart, right, they would run Michelle Obama at this point. I think she's the most electable. Obama, you saw she can even minorly replicate Obama's success in 2008. I guess now the standard is Biden's success in 2020, right? But if she can build a similar coalition, right, of voters, which is likely, because I think she has very broad appeal, I don't see why Michelle Obama would not win against most candidates in 2024, right?
Yeah, in the primary and the general.
Both, really.
So I mean, that's one where having a lack of experience would actually hurt you. I mean, if you have somebody who's a little more likable on the right side, they could really bring that home, and they'd be like, hey, what is your experience leading or because she hasn't owned a business. She was a lawyer before.
All she's done is make school lunches awful. That's the only political thing I can think she's ever done.
Yeah, I mean, and there are actual coattails to Obama. Those exist, but I mean there is a limit to that, and especially after we're coming off a Democratic administration. I mean, I think hopefully the Republican electorate will be pretty unified against Biden and everything he stands for. So. Yeah, I think there'd be a pretty, big push against that. I think we should actually get back to all the candidates we listed at the beginning of this, because
sure.
I mean we all said it had DeSantis on our list. So is that because we all think he's the best, or because we think he has the broadest support among the Republican primary? Because I picked him more for broadest support. That would not be my ideal candidate, but yeah. I do think he's got a good shot of winning both a primary and a general.
Well, I think I've made it clear. I think Ron Paul is probably the most ideological candidates of the ones that, I would say stand a marginal chance of at least running, right? DeSantis is probably the most electable candidate at this point, right? I think I see flaws in just about every candidate, right? Trump would drive out the turnout on the left, right? Ben Sasse, right, or some of the other more establishment candidates can easily be thwarted by some of the populist wing, right, of the party, right? Even Rand Paul himself or Ted Cruz, right? They kind of fall into the trap of, yeah, well, you're very for limited government, right? But what have you done? What did you do during the era of Trump, right? The real testament will be looking at polling data and looking at how the analytics say about how Trump is going to be viewed over the next 2 years. Because I would argue that it's still very close, right? It's still too close to us to judge how Trump will be viewed in the grand scheme of things. Actually, come back to me on this one, but Gallup had a pretty good poll I'd like to talk about there. But Colby, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, what's your general opinion of Ron DeSantis? Is it just because he's the most ideologically pure, or is it because he's the most electable candidate?
I'm going to be honest. I'm one of those uninformed voters about him since he's pretty recent on the political stage. I haven't heard much out of him except his COVID response. Saying that, he's pretty loud, which, especially that story, so that may give an appeal, especially in some of these lockdown states like California or Michigan. So if that makes sense, like sort of a savior thing, but that's like, I don't know if that's exactly a big enough poll to actually get him to win the primary or presidency.
Well, so like, why don't you argue for your ideal candidate? Then, because who'd you have listed first? Did you have Pence, right?
Pence wasn't first. I'd say Cruz.
Cruz, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I like Cruz. I still like Cruz.
Toughest Texas.
What?
Toughest Texas.
Dang right.
Yeah. I'm kind of interested on that. I guess we're going to kind of all poke holes in each other's preferred candidate. I mean, I just think, Cruz is never able to latch on to a lot of Trump support, even though he tried really hard. And I think there was a certain level of backlash to it. I mean, I was, less favorable towards Cruz when he voted to decertify the election. I was pretty upset about that. One thing we haven't talked about that is there was a big backlash in the business community because all the corporate money dried up. There was people were no, we are not donating to any conservative PACs after what happened to try to prove a point. But there's there's just that gut feeling, and this is unfair. But your outward persona does matter a lot. I mean, we were talking about Stacey Abrams, and AOC was well, what does AOC have going for it? She is attractive, a young woman. I mean, is that fair? That's how some Americans vote? No, but it's true.
It's been like that for a long time.
I mean, I think there was this poll how many times the taller candidate won, and it's overwhelmingly the taller candidate. So I just think like I said, Ted Cruz I think is a wounded animal. I think there's people on the very conservative side and the populist side that are just not happy with him, and then a lot of moderates. I think a lot of moderates have turned. I mean, the fact that he barely won a Senate seat won re-election in Texas kind of tells how weak of a candidate he is.
So I think we're also kind of beating around the bush just generally, right? How do y'all see the GOP's chances against generic Democrat, and for this thought experiment, we're assuming generic Republican as well, right? We're assuming national trends. We're assuming, obviously the demographic shifts of the nation in certain states, right? Georgia probably chiefly among that, but amongst that, excuse me. How do y'all feel about the GOP's chances just at large, right, in 2024, excuse me? Where do y'all see the coalition going? What states do you think we need to get back? Which type of voter do you think we need to appeal to? Paul, how do you feel about that, man?
I mean, 4 years. I mean, there's going to be some. I mean, I don't consider the trend's going to be that significant in just a 4-year time. Now, in the long term, some to consider. I mean, there's going to be more non-white voters. Definitely younger, which millennials and now Zoomers are becoming not becoming more progressive. We're definitely more progressive than the Boomers are. So that's something to consider. Look, I mean, I think some of the slightly red states are trending in the right direction. I mean, Texas isn't, but I tend to think that's a temporary thing. I think we can make some gains in on the border regions. I mean, Trump surprisingly was able to do that, so I don't see why any other Republican couldn't. Especially if you look at Abbott's approval among Hispanics in Texas, it was higher than Trump's. So I think there's a lot of hope there. Florida's shifting pretty solid. Ohio's shifted solid Republican. I think and I will now argue for Rubio. I think Rubio would do well in Pennsylvania. Not so much in Michigan. He doesn't have the same appeal to union workers as Trump did, but at the same time, he's not the staunchest libertarian on free trade. One of the things I actually don't like about him is how much he's pushed for ag subsidies for Florida. because the sugar industry is really big there. But I feel like he could make an argument to union workers in Michigan, that would regain some of Trump's support. And if it's between him and Kamala Harris, who's telling all these old white men that they're the problem, I could see them being, well, at least this guy doesn't hate us, so I think he's got a shot there. And one of the biggest things, and I've always said, like, people kind of forget, like, it's like 30% of people are Republicans, like 33% of people are Democrats, and the rest of people are moderates. Like, this is really going to come down to who wins moderates. And I think the fact that the person Hillary Clinton didn't want to run against was Rubio should kind of tell us that that's who the Democrats don't really want to run against and who's the best chance of winning.
So if y'all had to put two candidates on the ticket, right, president, vice president, that you think sort of balances where the party is as a whole, think Trump, Pence, right? Trump obviously had the populist wing. Pence got the evangelical voters out, and it was enough to win in 2016. Colby, if you had to pick one 1-2 punch, so to speak, right? Which one? What do you think it would look like?
I haven't really thought about the VP too much. VP candidates, maybe Cruz and some other person who'd appeal with, like I said, the kind of taking away the wounded animal look of Cruz. I can't think of who that'd be.
Don Jr. maybe.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want that, but yeah, no, I think that's that would make sense for that combination. Though it is interesting to is Trump's popularity transferable to a family member? Like, I feel like if Ivanka Trump ran, she would not get anywhere near the same amount of support. I mean, I know a lot of people find her very attractive, including the president or the former president, but
yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily a name thing, right? I think Don Jr. probably would stand a better chance than Ivanka because he got very political.
Yeah,
right? But he was definitely more political than Ivanka was.
Well, and
towards the
not
end,
only
right?
that, though, he definitely had to fake it a little less than her. I mean, I know everybody in the Trump family is, was always pro-gay marriage, probably fairly pro-abortion, if I'm being honest. But, I mean, Don Jr. was an avid hunter even before, his dad ran for president. So I think he kind of already, didn't hate people in rural America the same way I think Ivanka probably did. Like, she probably, thought people who were against the Planned Parenthood were evil, like the Handmaid's Tale kind of people. So, yeah, I think he'd have a better shot there. Well, I mean, what do you think to this question? Who do you think the 1-2 punch would be?
Well, you'd have to find a sort of balancing act, right? Ron DeSantis at this point, I don't know what his biggest flaw is. It might be a situation like George Bush in 2000 where you need someone with sort of almost foreign policy, almost bureaucratic appeal, right? I could see like maybe a Ben Sass being a good vice presidential pick, someone who sort of maybe represents the more establishment, not quite establishment actually, like veteran wing of the party, right?
Establishment.
No. Don't misconstrue me on that one because I'm not saying establishment has a connotation of representing the party interests.
Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell, right? I'm talking veteran, like someone who's just been around the block a few times, right? Maybe, I'll pitch this one to y'all. Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley ticket, right?
Wait, who's on the top of that?
Ron DeSantis on the top. Nikki Haley would be 2024 vice presidential pick. Nikki Haley, she does have more of the, I wouldn't say foreign policy, kind of quite rooted with the UN, right? And she definitely has her own appeals, right? Being a woman, right? Since that matters for stuff now, I could definitely see that being a good ticket at this point, right? Definitely need someone with Ron DeSantis who has more of a foreign policy aspect, right? That could appeal to some voters, right? But let's see, we're about the 45-minute mark here, so I think unless y'all have any more thoughts on the 2024 race you want to say, or it could be rambling, it could be thinking aloud on this one.
No, yeah, I kind of want to address that. So that's an interesting thing. The one of the things you try to consider for VP not is who will help you pick up a state. And so when I was thinking about Rubio, I was like, well, Rubio, DeSantis, those are both from Florida, so I don't know what the outside appeal would be like. I think Rubio would help win over Nevada. I think there's a lot of Catholics in Pennsylvania. I think Rubio would help there. But as far as a VP, I was like, well, I do like Nikki Haley, but I don't know if she would bring any Trump support. I mean, she was in the administration, but she was also very critical of his handling of the voter fraud stuff, which, I like. But, I mean, you tell me, Colby, like, how do you, like, feel about Nikki Haley? Would you be hesitant to throw your support to her? I mean, I'm pretty sure you'd vote for the Republican regardless. But
in terms of, like, primarying her, if I had the chance.
I mean, she's not in an elected position right now.
Yeah.
But, yes, to that point.
The only thing I really know about her is her involvement with the UN. She doesn't have anything to do with like the economy or spending, really. Well, technically, I guess through the UN, because she was kind of cutting us off with the UN, sort of, right? Like, no more criticizing the UN.
Yeah.
More like y'all are crap, which I loved.
But she did use the UN to help, like, get a lot of the what do you call when you stop trade with another country, embargo against North Korea, which she said that was, that was one of the utilities of the UN, like that allows you to do things like that. So that was good. And I did like the way she, referred to the UN. She would, stood up for us changing our capital to,
capital?
I'm sorry, the embassy to Israel. In Israel, to Jerusalem, from Tel Aviv. So I think, got a lot of support for, standing up for that. And, to Trump's credit for making that decision.
I have an outsider I just thought of.
All right, let's hear it.
Maybe Mad Dog Mattis. I don't know if he'd actually get in that ring, but...
Yeah, well, I mean, talk about being old. I mean, he's 70-something. Well, and I like him. It's interesting, an unmarried man becoming president. That's it was the last one.
Buchanan?
What?
Or not Pat Buchanan.
Buchanan. No, Van Buren.
Van Buren was.
Yeah.
I think James Buchanan was the last bachelor president. But I'm just thinking about like candidates now who can pick up a state for Ron DeSantis, right? So Pat Toomey, I think you out of the question, right? Pennsylvania, because of how he voted. Ron Johnson, maybe. I mean, he's definitely got experience beating Democrats in Wisconsin, right? Yeah. 2010, I think he defeated a Democratic incumbent, if I'm not mistaken.
To be fair, that was a wave year, though.
Right, but still beating I mean, what was Wisconsin's margin of error for Obama? It was, 10%, right?
Yeah.
Russ Feingold, he beat a Democratic incumbent there, so you can see someone like picking up a Rust Belt state, right, like that. But that would be my candidate who could pick up a state, right? I still think Nikki Haley is a better balancing act, right, for so to speak. I mean, Trump really didn't need to win Indiana, and he went for Mike Pence.
No,
right?
You're right. He was more locked in the evangelicals.
Right.
Which he did a pretty good job. The reason I started liking Trump was I saw the vice presidential debate between Pence and Kane. Yeah. And I really liked Pence. Pence sold me.
that was kind of the funny thing. If you're like, see, like, we can win in these debates. It's like, well, why didn't we just elect him president? Or like the prime, But yeah, no, I agree with you. I think and Pence was always a very good statesman. He seemed very professional when, he did anything, and as his role as VP. I do want to actually address your Mattis thing. Like, I would definitely vote for Mattis. I actually think
the only thing about Mattis I don't like is that he definitely carried the backs of the Europe military like we were doing for years.
That's okay. That's a more policy issue, but I think it's a good thing to bring up at the point. Like, one of the things that really annoys me is people will say, like, why are we, supporting the military, or there's like free rider problem with NATO. I mean, you can't at the same time like complain about the cost of this and then also be like, we need to raise the military budget. Like, well, then what's the point? Like, if you're saying like we're losing money on this, you actually have to be like, okay, we need to like pull back here and then actually cut defense spending. But like Trump would always like brag about like he increased the defense budget, which, to one point I'm like, well, I think that's an important thing. But at the other point I'm like, then why are you complaining about like NATO funding? Like, I think it'd be useful if some countries, made to the commitment, but at the same time, it is irrelevant to like the point of NATO is the mutual defense clause that like if any NATO nation is attacked, that we will intervene. It really doesn't matter if Croatia. I actually don't know if they're a NATO member, but or. Oh, is it? Okay. Well, I just kind of picked a random country, but in Europe. But yeah, I mean, clearly the Germans are kind of, abusing the system, but I think that could have handled in more appropriate negotiations and just like screaming about it. And I think there's no point to say like they need to take more of the burden unless you're actually going to cut military spending.
Well, any final thoughts on the 2024 race?
Oh,
I'm actually, the more and more I thought about it,
yeah.
the more and more I've thought about it, I still really I'm thinking Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. I think that'd be a good ticket, right?
Yeah. So like to his Jim Mattis point, yeah, I just don't see him winning a primary. Like a lot of, I think, I just know from people in my family, a lot of very pro-Trump people were very mad at Mattis the way he left office.
I need to fact check myself. Croatia is in NATO.
Oh, okay.
Croatia, really?
I was shocked to find out. So I guess we learned something new today.
Well, I mean, shocker, I was right.
They attacked her in the Balkan Wars. Well, we did intervene. Never mind.
Yeah,
we did intervene.
I guess I would say, yeah. For me, I would probably go. Even though I guess you don't pick up a state, but yeah, I'd probably go Rubio and Nikki Haley. I think there'd be a balancing there. I think actually maybe Rubio and Scott Walker. I mean, if you're talking about picking up Wisconsin, that might do a better job of like ensuring that state. But yeah, I think that's probably your best option. I mean, to me, Rubio has like the foreign policy, chops, and then at the same time, he, he's not too libertarian where he would alienate some of the people who are, concerned with the Republicans getting rid of all like Social Security or I mean clearly I think he knows we need to adjust that, but I mean some people think like Republicans just want to like get rid of like the social safety net. I was like, there's really no Republican who like seriously talks about that. Even Rand Paul doesn't think he could actually get that through Congress, an actual like getting rid of the entitlement programs. Just I think they want to control them and ideally like shrink them, but that's my opinion on the issue.
Okay, any final thoughts on 2024?
Not really.
Not really? All right. Well, thank y'all for tuning in to another episode of the Hitching podcast. We'd like to thank a few noted people at this one. We'd like to thank first the Intercollegiate Studies Institute for sponsoring the Hitching Post. We'd like to thank Anchor for meeting us on Spotify and Apple. We'd like to thank the listeners here for tuning in and continuing to support us. Thank y'all. Thank y'all, guys. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.